Marcus Johnson had always dreamed of owning a home in a quiet neighborhood where he could finally rest after years of hard work. He had grown up in a small apartment, the kind where walls were thin and peace was often disturbed by arguments in the hallway or the sound of traffic outside. For decades, he worked tirelessly as an architect, sketching designs late at night and traveling from site to site during the day. At last, his dedication paid off, and he was able to buy a beautiful house in a suburban community. It wasn't the largest home on the block, nor was it the most decorated, but it was his. That fact alone made Marcus proud every time he pulled into the driveway. The first few weeks were filled with excitement. He spent time arranging his furniture, planting a few flowers in the yard, and enjoying the fresh air from his porch. Everything seemed to be falling into place. He noticed the neighborhood was well maintained, the streets clean, and most of the neighbors polite. Families waved as they passed, kids rode bikes on the sidewalks, and the evenings were filled with the soft glow of porch lights. It was everything Marcus wanted: safety, calm, and a place to belong. But in every community, there's always someone who feels the need to control more than they should. For Marcus, that person was Karen Miller. She lived 2 houses down and carried the title of HOA president with the seriousness of a judge in a courtroom. She walked the neighborhood daily, clipboard in hand, making notes about lawns, fences, and decorations. While others ignored her strict ways or rolled their eyes behind her back, Marcus became a fresh target simply because he was new. Their first meeting was unremarkable, though it left Marcus unsettled. On the 3rd day after he moved in, Karen knocked on his door. She introduced herself with a tight smile and handed him a printed copy of the HOA's rules. "You'll want to read these carefully," she said, her tone more commanding than friendly. Marcus thanked her politely, assuring her that he would go over the rules. Still, the way she looked him up and down made him feel less like a neighbor and more like a student being lectured by a stern teacher. Over the next few weeks, Karen found reasons to stop by or call out to him when he was outside. The first complaint was about his mailbox, which she said looked slightly darker than the approved shade. Marcus didn't even know there were approved shades for mailboxes. He nodded, promised to check, and returned to his work. A few days later, she commented that his grass looked a little long and suggested he hire the same landscaper she used. Marcus kept his calm, saying he would mow it on the weekend. Then came questions about his truck in the driveway, whether it fit the HOA's guidelines for overnight parking. Marcus started to notice a pattern. None of the other neighbors seemed to get the same attention from Karen, even though some of their lawns had weeds or their mailboxes were mismatched. It was as if Karen had chosen him specifically to monitor, and Marcus suspected it was because he was new and, perhaps, because he didn't quite fit the picture Karen imagined for her neighborhood. Despite her persistence, Marcus refused to lose his cool. He had learned long ago that patience was a strength, not a weakness. He responded to every comment with a calm voice and a polite smile. Neighbors who saw these interactions admired how composed he was, whispering to each other later about how Karen had finally met someone who wouldn't be rattled. One evening, Marcus was sitting on his porch with a glass of iced tea when a couple who lived across the street stopped by. Their names were Jim and Linda, both retired teachers who had lived in the community for over 20 years. They leaned on the porch rail and told Marcus stories about Karen. "She's been running the HOA like a kingdom for years," Jim said with a chuckle. "Don't take it personally. She does this to everyone at first, but well, you seem to get a little more of her attention." Linda added softly, "Most of us have just learned to live with her. But don't let her push you around. You own your home, Marcus. Don't forget that." Their words gave Marcus reassurance. He wasn't imagining things. Karen was difficult, but he didn't have to bow down to her. Still, he chose not to fight. His peace mattered more than winning small arguments. As the days passed, Marcus tried to focus on the positive aspects of his new life. He enjoyed early morning walks, greeting joggers and dog walkers along the way. He hosted his sister and her children for a weekend, where the kids played in the yard while he grilled burgers. His garage became a small workshop where he tinkered with projects, fixing furniture, or sketching new designs for clients. It was the kind of life he had always wanted, and he wasn't about to let one neighbor ruin it. But Karen never stopped. She began leaving little notes in his mailbox with reminders of rules, highlighting sections that she thought applied to him. Marcus collected them in a folder, shaking his head at how much time she seemed to spend on him. His patience was steady, though a part of him wondered just how far she would go. There was one moment that stood out to Marcus, a sign of what was coming. He returned home one afternoon and saw Karen standing in his driveway, arms crossed, staring at his garage door. When he asked if everything was all right, she said she was just making sure the color of the paint matched the neighborhood standard. Marcus smiled politely, though inside he felt a chill. That wasn't a neighborly visit, it was a warning. Still, Marcus chose to let it go. He told himself that respect was earned through calm actions, not arguments. If he kept his head high and stayed kind, maybe things would settle down. He didn't know then that Karen's need for control would push her to cross boundaries in a way he could never have imagined. For now, though, Marcus sat on his porch at night, watching the stars peek through the suburban sky. He believed he had found peace, even if one neighbor seemed determined to test his patience. But peace has a way of being challenged, especially when pride and entitlement clash with dignity and quiet strength. The weeks rolled by, and Marcus grew more comfortable in his new home, though the presence of Karen lingered like a shadow across his days. She had made herself known in ways that weren't hostile enough to be called an attack but were persistent enough to feel like a constant itch. Every time Marcus thought he had settled into the rhythm of the neighborhood, Karen's sharp voice or sharp eyes would remind him she was watching. The first confrontation that truly stood out happened one Saturday morning. Marcus had woken early, ready to mow his lawn before the sun rose too high. As he pushed the mower back and forth, he noticed Karen standing on the sidewalk with her clipboard. She wasn't talking, just staring and scribbling something down. Marcus decided to break the silence. "Good morning, Karen," he called out with a polite smile. Her reply was quick and flat. "Your grass is an inch taller than the approved limit." Marcus paused, gripping the handle of the mower. He had just started cutting, and yet here she was, already pointing out flaws. "I'm working on it right now," he replied calmly. Karen gave a small nod but stayed there for another 5 minutes, watching him as if to make sure he followed through. The whole encounter might have lasted only moments, but it left Marcus with a sinking feeling. It wasn't just about rules for Karen, it was about control. Later that week, another incident unfolded. Marcus had parked his pickup truck in his driveway overnight. It wasn't an old truck, in fact, it was well kept and clean. Yet, the next day, he found a printed notice tucked under the windshield wiper. It was a reminder from the HOA about prohibited vehicles, though the rule only applied to commercial trucks or RVs. Marcus knew his vehicle was well within the guidelines. Still, the notice carried Karen's signature at the bottom. When he saw her later, walking past his yard, he asked politely, "Was this meant for me? My truck doesn't fall under that category." Karen tilted her head and said in her usual firm voice, "It might not now, but the board is reviewing updates to the policy. I thought you should know in advance." Marcus bit back a sigh. She wasn't enforcing rules, she was inventing them, or at least hinting at future ones that didn't exist yet. He thanked her and let the conversation end there. Inside, though, he felt the weight of irritation. The turning point came one afternoon when Marcus was unloading groceries from his car. Karen walked over briskly, waving her clipboard as though she had urgent news. "Mr. Johnson," she began, "I noticed your trash bins are visible from the street. That's against Section 14, Paragraph 6 of the HOA Code." Marcus glanced at the bins, neatly lined against the side of his garage. It's garbage day, Karen. The truck is coming in the morning. Her lips tightened. Still, they shouldn't be out more than 12 hours before pickup. That's the rule. Marcus held her gaze and gave a slow nod. I'll keep that in mind. Karen huffed and walked away, but not before making another note on her clipboard. Marcus stood there for a long moment, bags of groceries in his hands, thinking about how absurd the situation had become. He wasn't a teenager being scolded by a teacher, he was a homeowner who had worked his whole life for this place. One evening, as Marcus was sweeping his porch, he heard laughter coming from the sidewalk. Two neighbors, a middle-aged man named David and his wife, Sharon, approached with their dog. They greeted Marcus warmly and then leaned closer, lowering their voices as if sharing a secret. "You're handling Karen better than most of us did," David said with a chuckle. "She used to check our holiday decorations with a measuring tape to make sure the lights weren't too bright." Sharon rolled her eyes. "She told me once my flower pots didn't match the neighborhood color scheme. Can you believe that? I nearly lost it." Marcus laughed softly. Their stories reassured him that he wasn't alone. Karen's behavior wasn't personal, it was simply who she was. Still, something about the way she singled him out felt heavier than just routine nitpicking. As weeks turned into a couple of months, Marcus's patience was tested again and again. Sometimes it was little things, Karen pointing out that his curtains weren't uniform with the rest of the block, or that his recycling bin lid wasn't closed tightly enough. Other times, it was her presence, lingering too long in front of his house, as though she was waiting to catch him breaking a rule. Yet Marcus remained calm. He had a quiet strength that didn't bend easily. He knew anger would only fuel her sense of power. Instead, he smiled, nodded, and went on with his life. His peace was worth more than any argument. But peace doesn't last forever when boundaries are constantly tested. One Saturday, Marcus returned from a long day of visiting his sister and her family. As he pulled into the driveway, he noticed Karen standing at the corner, talking animatedly to another neighbor. Though he couldn't hear the words, the way she gestured toward his house told him she was discussing him again. Marcus carried his overnight bag inside and told himself it didn't matter. People talked. What mattered was how he lived. Still, as he unpacked his things, he couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was building up to something bigger. The moment came soon after. Marcus was relaxing in his living room one afternoon when a knock echoed at his door. He opened it to find Karen once again, her expression stern. "I've noticed your garage door has been left open on several occasions," she said. "That's not safe. It attracts unwanted attention." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "I was moving things in and out. It wasn't open for long." "Still," she replied, "we have standards to maintain. I'll be keeping an eye on it." That sentence lingered with Marcus long after she left. It wasn't just about the door. It was about the way she felt entitled to monitor his life. Neighbors might have tolerated her for years, but Marcus realized he would eventually have to draw a line. He didn't yet know that line would be crossed in the most unexpected way when Karen's sense of ownership over the neighborhood would push her right into his private space. For now, Marcus stayed calm, watching the sun dip behind the trees that evening, but deep down he felt it. The quiet tension between them was building, like a storm waiting to break. Marcus enjoyed routines. He liked knowing that when he came home after work, his house would be waiting, his garage door would slide open with a press of the button, and his truck would rest safely inside. That sense of control gave him peace. But one Friday evening, that peace was interrupted in a way he never expected. He pulled into the driveway just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. But when the garage door opened, Marcus froze. Inside, sitting where his truck usually rested, was a shiny silver SUV. The garage light flickered above it, as if spotlighting the fact that something was very wrong. At first, Marcus thought maybe he had pressed the wrong button, maybe opened the wrong garage. But no, this was his house, his driveway, his property. He parked his truck at the curb and stepped out, confused. Slowly, he walked into the garage, circled the SUV, and shook his head in disbelief. It wasn't a mistake. Someone had parked in his garage, closed the door behind it, and left their car sitting there like it belonged. Marcus checked the license plate and recognized it from the neighborhood. His stomach dropped when he realized whose car it was. Karen's. For a long moment, Marcus just stood there. He couldn't wrap his mind around the audacity. How could someone think it was acceptable to park inside another person's garage, on private property? He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. Losing his temper wouldn't help. Instead, he closed the garage door and went inside his house. After setting down his things, he walked over to his neighbors' homes, knocking gently. Jim and Linda answered first. Marcus asked if they knew anything about the car in his garage. Their eyes widened when he told them it was Karen's. "She parked in your garage?" Jim asked, astonished. "That's crossing a line." Linda shook her head. "We knew she was controlling, but this is something else." Marcus nodded. "I'm going to talk to her. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something." The couple assured him he wasn't. They wished him luck, though their expressions showed they doubted reason would work with Karen. Later that evening, Marcus knocked on Karen's door. She opened it with her usual stiff smile, though it faltered slightly when she saw his serious expression. "Karen," Marcus began calmly, "your SUV is in my garage. I need to know why." She lifted her chin. "Parking is tight this week. There was a gathering down the street, and spaces were full. I assumed it wouldn't be a problem if I used your garage temporarily." Marcus blinked, stunned at how casually she said it. "Karen, you didn't ask me. You entered my property without permission." Her voice grew firmer, as though she were reminding a child of a household rule. "I'm the HOA president, Marcus. I have authority over the neighborhood. It's not like I'm a stranger." Marcus's patience stretched thin, but he kept his tone steady. "Authority doesn't give you the right to use my private garage. That space belongs to me. It's part of my home." Karen crossed her arms, clearly irritated by his resistance. "It's temporary. I'll move it tomorrow." Marcus held her gaze for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. Tomorrow. But don't do this again, Karen. Ever." He turned and walked back to his house, but inside he felt a storm brewing. It wasn't just the act of trespassing, it was the way she dismissed his ownership, as though his property was hers to manage. That night, Marcus sat at his desk, staring out the window at his closed garage. He thought about all the times he had let Karen's small comments slide, the notes she had left, the nitpicking. This was different. This wasn't about HOA rules or lawn care. This was about respect or the lack of it. The next morning, Marcus woke early and checked the garage. The SUV was still there. He shook his head. Karen hadn't moved it. Instead, she had left a note taped to his garage door, running errands later. "I'll pick it up this afternoon. Thanks for your patience." Patience. The word nearly made Marcus laugh. His patience had been tested for weeks, but this was no longer about patience. This was about setting a boundary. When noon rolled around and the SUV was still in his garage, Marcus made a decision. He pressed the garage door button, lowered it, and locked it securely. He even added the side bolt lock, something he rarely used. Then he walked back inside and poured himself a cup of coffee, sitting by the window with a calm expression. Hours later, the sound of footsteps approached his porch. The doorbell rang, and there stood Karen, her face red with frustration. "Marcus. My car." I need it. Marcus leaned casually against the door frame. Yes, your car is safe. In my garage. The same garage you entered without permission. Karen huffed, her arms flailing in disbelief. You can't keep it locked in there. I have errands to run. This is outrageous. Marcus's voice stayed calm. Karen, what's outrageous is you using my property like it belongs to you. You trespassed. That's not acceptable. Her voice grew louder, drawing the attention of neighbors. A few stepped onto their porches, curious about the commotion. Karen didn't seem to notice. I'm the HOA president. I have rights here. Marcus shook his head slowly. No, Karen. You have responsibilities, not rights over other people's homes. This garage is mine. You parked in it without asking. That makes it my decision when you get it back. Karen's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find words. Finally, she stomped her foot. Unlock it now, or I'll call the police. Marcus raised his eyebrows. Go ahead. Tell them you broke into my garage and parked your car there without permission. Let's see how that works out. For the first time, Karen's confidence cracked. Her voice softened, almost pleading. Marcus, please. I didn't think it was a big deal. Just open it. Marcus sighed and looked at the small crowd of neighbors now gathered, whispering among themselves. This wasn't just about a car anymore. It was about respect in the community. Karen had been exposed, her entitlement on full display for everyone to see. He folded his arms. Karen, I'll unlock the garage when you apologize. Not just to me, but to everyone you've treated like they're beneath you. People here deserve better than your clipboard and your constant policing. Karen's face flushed deeper. She glanced around, realizing how many eyes were on her. For once, she didn't have control of the narrative. Marcus had turned the tables. She muttered something under her breath, then said louder, Fine. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have parked in your garage. Marcus studied her for a moment, then nodded. Apology accepted. I'll unlock it now. As he opened the garage and watched Karen's SUV back out, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He hadn't yelled, he hadn't lost control. He had simply stood his ground. And in doing so, he had shown everyone that respect wasn't given freely to titles or authority, it was earned through behavior. Neighbors clapped lightly as Karen drove away, embarrassed and humiliated. Marcus went back inside, sipping the last of his coffee, knowing this was only the beginning. Karen had been challenged, and though she might retreat for now, he suspected her pride would not let the matter rest so easily. But Marcus didn't worry. He had faced bigger battles in his life. And now, in this quiet suburban neighborhood, he had made it clear, his home was his, and no one, not even the self-appointed queen of the HOA, had the right to take that away. The morning sun rose slowly, spilling light across Marcus's yard, but he was already awake, sipping coffee by the window. His garage was locked, and inside it sat Karen's silver SUV. The night before, he had warned her never to cross that line again, yet her attitude had been so dismissive that he knew the lesson hadn't sunk in. This time, he decided he would not simply let it slide. By mid-morning, Karen came marching up his driveway, her heels clicking loudly against the pavement. She pounded on the door with a force that rattled the frame. Marcus opened it calmly, standing tall but relaxed. Marcus, she barked, her voice sharp enough to cut through the quiet street. Open that garage right now. I need my car. You've had your fun. Marcus leaned on the doorframe, his expression steady. Karen, it's not about fun. It's about respect. You took my space, ignored my property rights, and treated it like it was nothing. You left me no choice but to lock the garage. Your car will stay inside until you acknowledge what you did. Her face turned red. You can't do that. I'm the HOA president. I'll have you fined for this. I'll have you written up. Marcus shook his head slowly. You can't fine me for protecting my own home. You've been treating this neighborhood like your personal kingdom, Karen. That ends today. Karen's voice grew louder, and soon neighbors began peeking through curtains, then stepping onto porches. They were curious, some amused, some relieved that finally someone had the courage to stand up to her. She pointed a finger at Marcus as if scolding a child. You are breaking rules. This is not how we handle issues here. Marcus kept his voice calm, but firm enough for everyone outside to hear. No, Karen. What's against the rules is trespassing into someone's property and using it without permission. What's against the rules is thinking your position gives you the right to ignore basic respect. That's what this is about. The silence that followed carried weight. Neighbors looked at each other, nodding slightly. They had endured years of Karen's nitpicking, but Marcus was voicing what many had wanted to say. Karen stomped her foot on the porch like a frustrated child. I'll call the police, she shouted. You'll see. They'll make you open it. Marcus didn't flinch. Go ahead. Call them. Tell them exactly what happened. Tell them you entered my garage without permission, parked your car inside, and now you want it back. Let's see how that conversation goes. For the first time, Karen's voice faltered. She glanced at the neighbors watching, their arms crossed, their eyes following every move. Her power, once so strong, seemed to slip from her grasp. Karen, Marcus continued, his voice softer now but still strong, I'm not your enemy. I'm your neighbor. But you can't walk all over people like this. You crossed a line. You need to admit it. Her jaw tightened. She looked around and saw the small crowd gathering. Even Jim and Linda, the elderly couple across the street, were standing in their yard, nodding in support of Marcus. It was the first time she realized she wasn't just facing Marcus, she was facing the judgment of the whole community. Her tone dropped, quieter now, though still dripping with pride. So what do you want, Marcus? What will it take for you to unlock the garage? Marcus folded his arms. An apology. A real one. Not just to me, but to the people you've treated unfairly all this time. You've been making lives harder, not easier. That has to change. Karen gasped as if he had insulted her. Apologize. Me. I was only enforcing standards. A voice from the crowd spoke up. It was David, the neighbor with the dog. Standards? You measured our Christmas lights with a ruler, Karen. You fined Sharon for having flower pots that were the wrong color. That's not standards, that's control. Another neighbor chimed in, shaking her head. You once told my kids they couldn't chalk on the sidewalk because it looked messy. That sidewalk belongs to everyone, Karen, not just you. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Karen's face went pale. For years, she had ruled through intimidation and paperwork, but now, under the weight of so many voices, her control crumbled. Marcus didn't raise his voice, but his words carried further than hers ever had. Karen, this neighborhood deserves better. You don't have to like me, but you will respect me, and you will respect everyone else here. That starts with admitting you were wrong. Karen's lips trembled. She looked at her SUV behind the locked door, then at the expectant eyes around her. Finally, she dropped her shoulders, her voice breaking. Fine. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have parked in your garage. I shouldn't have acted like I owned this place. The words weren't perfect, but they were enough. Marcus nodded slowly. That's all it takes sometimes. Respect. Now I'll unlock the garage. He walked to the side door, turned the lock, and pressed the button. The garage door creaked open, and the silver SUV sat there, trapped no longer. Karen hurried to her car, avoiding the stares of her neighbors. As she drove away, the crowd slowly dispersed, but the energy lingered. Something had shifted. Jim called out from across the street, raising a hand. "Well done, Marcus." About time someone stood up to her. Marcus smiled faintly, lifting a hand in return. Inside, though, he felt both relief and resolve. He hadn't wanted a fight, but sometimes peace required firmness. Later that evening, Marcus sat on his porch, watching children play on the sidewalk. The neighbors waved more freely, as though a weight had been lifted. He realized that locking that garage wasn't just about protecting his own property. It was about showing the whole neighborhood that no one, not even the loudest voice with a title, had the right to take away dignity. As night settled in, Marcus felt a sense of calm he hadn't felt since moving in. He knew Karen wouldn't forget what happened, and she might still try to hold onto control in smaller ways. But one thing was certain, her reign of fear had been broken, not just by him, but by the strength of a community that had finally found its voice. The days after the garage incident felt different in the neighborhood. For years, Karen had walked around with her clipboard, pointing out small faults and making people feel uneasy in their own homes. But after the scene outside Marcus's house, something shifted. Neighbors smiled more openly at him, children rode their bikes past his yard without fear of being scolded, and there was a quiet sense of relief in the air. People had seen Karen face consequences for the first time, and they knew things would not be the same. Marcus didn't brag about what had happened. He wasn't the type to gloat. He went about his life as usual, watering his plants in the morning, driving to work, tinkering with projects in his garage. But wherever he went, neighbors would stop to thank him quietly. "You handled that better than anyone else could," one said. Another whispered, "We've been waiting for someone to stand up to her. You gave us courage." Even though the confrontation had been public, Marcus stayed humble. "I just wanted respect," he would reply with a calm smile. But deep inside, he felt proud, not for embarrassing Karen, but for reminding everyone, including himself, that dignity mattered more than titles. Karen, on the other hand, kept a low profile. For a few days, she avoided walking the neighborhood with her clipboard. The silence felt strange. People had grown so used to her daily patrols that her absence felt like a missing piece of the routine, though not one anyone missed. Still, Marcus knew it wouldn't last. Karen was too proud to stay quiet forever. Sure enough, the HOA board scheduled a meeting the following week. Notices were slipped into mailboxes, inviting homeowners to attend. Marcus decided to go, though he had never planned to get involved with the HOA. He figured it was time to hear for himself how things were handled and to make sure his side of the story was heard if Karen tried to twist it. The evening of the meeting, neighbors gathered in the community center. Folding chairs lined the room, and a long table sat at the front where the board members, including Karen, took their seats. Karen wore her usual serious expression, but there was something different in her eyes, a shadow of nervousness. She cleared her throat and began the meeting, trying to maintain her usual authority. "As HOA president, I want to remind everyone that rules are here to protect the beauty and value of our neighborhood," she said, her voice steady but softer than usual. "We've had some recent disagreements, but I believe we can move forward in unity." Murmurs spread through the room. People were waiting, curious to see how the topic of Marcus's garage would come up. Finally, a board member named Mr. Thompson, an older man with kind eyes, spoke up. "Karen, with respect, the board has received several complaints. Many of them mention overreach in how rules have been enforced. One situation in particular, parking in another resident's garage, has caused quite a stir." All eyes turned toward Karen, then toward Marcus, who sat quietly in the second row. Karen shifted in her chair, clearly uncomfortable. "That matter was blown out of proportion," she said quickly. "It was temporary, and there was no harm done." Marcus raised his hand calmly, and the board nodded for him to speak. He stood, his voice steady but strong enough to carry through the room. With all respect, it wasn't about harm. It was about boundaries. My garage is part of my home, and it was used without my permission. That isn't temporary, it's trespassing. And when I tried to address it calmly, I was dismissed. The room fell silent. Marcus didn't rant or raise his voice, his words spoke for themselves. People nodded in agreement, their faces showing they understood. Another neighbor, Sharon, stood up. Marcus is right. This isn't the first time Karen has made people feel powerless in their own homes. She fined us over our flower pots. She scolded our children. We've all felt it. Soon, more voices joined in. David mentioned the Christmas lights. A young mother spoke about being told her son couldn't play basketball in the driveway. Each story added weight to what Marcus had already said. Karen's shoulders slumped slightly. For once, she wasn't in control. She tried to defend herself, saying she was only protecting the neighborhood standards, but the words didn't carry the same authority they once had. The board listened carefully, but it was clear they were moved by the testimonies of the residents. Finally, Mr. Thompson cleared his throat again. It's obvious the community feels these rules have been enforced with too heavy a hand. Karen, we appreciate your years of service, but changes must be made. From this point forward, the board will review enforcement actions collectively. No single member, not even the president, will have the power to act alone. A wave of relief swept through the room. People clapped softly, some even cheering. Marcus sat down again, quietly satisfied. He hadn't asked for power, but the outcome felt just. It wasn't about punishing Karen, it was about balance being restored. Karen sat stiffly at the table, her face pale. She nodded slowly, though her pride was clearly wounded. For the first time, she realized the neighborhood no longer feared her. After the meeting, neighbors gathered outside, chatting in small groups. Many approached Marcus, shaking his hand, thanking him again. Jim and Linda smiled warmly. "You've changed this place for the better," Linda said. "We can breathe again." Marcus smiled, though he stayed modest. "I just wanted to live in peace, like everyone else." As the weeks passed, life in the neighborhood grew lighter. Karen was still around, but she no longer marched with her clipboard or barked out orders. She kept her distance from Marcus, avoiding direct confrontation. Though she never became truly friendly, she was quieter, more cautious. Her pride may not have allowed her to admit it fully, but she had learned a lesson that day. For Marcus, the change meant freedom. He could enjoy his home without constant interruptions. He spent weekends barbecuing with family, chatting with neighbors, and working on projects in his garage without glancing over his shoulder. The tension that once clouded the air had lifted. One evening, as the sun set and the children played tag on the grass, Marcus sat on his porch, reflecting. Moving into this neighborhood had come with challenges he hadn't expected, but he realized something important: sometimes, standing firm with quiet strength could inspire change far beyond oneself. He didn't see himself as a hero. He was just a man who wanted respect, who believed every person had the right to feel safe and comfortable in their own home. Yet, by refusing to be walked over, he had reminded an entire community that respect wasn't something one person could demand, it was something everyone deserved. And though Karen still lived only 2 houses down, she no longer represented fear or frustration. Instead, she stood as a reminder that entitlement crumbles when faced with dignity, patience, and strength. Marcus leaned back in his chair, watching the lights of the houses flicker on, one by one. He smiled softly, knowing that, at last, this neighborhood truly felt like home.